In this lesson, we're going to create a very simple atmospheric landscape. The focus is not going to be about trying to be photorealistic. Rather, it's about creating a mood and a feeling. I'm also going to be using one of those dreaded blossoms that you can get when doing a watercolor and turn it around and use it to my advantage to create a tree line in the distance. So instead of it ruining the painting, we're going to make it work for us. So you might be wondering, what is a blossom? What does that mean? What does it look like? It happens when the paper surface isn't drying evenly. For example, the diagonal center inside this example dried faster than the two outside edges. So the two wet areas on the outside competed with the dry center, which created this irregular edge. That's why it's always important to pay attention to how the paper surface is drying, because most times you're not even going to know that there's a problem until after it's done. But in our case, we want to use this problem to our advantage to help create our painting. So let's begin by looking at my reference photo. This is an old photograph that I took years ago. It's not very sharp, you can't see a lot of detail, but it's going to give me perspective and a starting point. Actually, in some ways it's really quite good. Since you really can't see much, you have to focus on the essence instead. All I can really see clearly is this house, so I'm lightly going to pencil it in. I'm not going to add a lot of detail. All I'm trying to do is give the viewer a focal point inside my painting. Now let's look at some of the materials I'll be using. A large water container, a shallow well palette, and a combination of brushes, a number 30, 20, 14, 8, and number 3, along with my wash brushes. I'll be using different kinds of brushes, unnatural, sable synthetic blends, and synthetics. I'm going to use one of my wash brushes. In this case, I'll be using a bamboo hockey brush and flood the surface with clean water. And my paper choice is going to be 300-pound cold press Arches paper. Then using my number 20 sable synthetic blend, I'm going to take clean water and put it on my palette and use some of the leftover color that I already have and mix it into the clean water. If you're wondering what colors I have on my palette, I have a little quinacridone gold mixed in with a little quinacridone magenta. I'll also add a little French ultramarine blue into this mix. If I want to intensify the color or deepen the value, I'm going to add more color and less water. I'll apply my mix to the upper left-hand corner and allow the color to run into the clean water. I'm constantly moving my paper so the color can continue to run and blend on the paper. I wanted just a little glow in the center, so I added a little quinacridone gold. Now I'm going to let this begin to dry, but not all the way. In the meantime, I'm going to start preparing my color for my ridgeline. All I'm doing is adding a little more French ultramarine blue into my color mix. You can see the combination of how it looks along with the quinacridone gold. Now going back to my painting, the surface has had just a little more time to dry. So it's a little damp, but not really wet. Then using my number 20 sable synthetic blend, I'm going to load my brush full of color and then apply it to where I want my ridgeline. I'm also going to try to keep the area inside that pencil line where my house is dry. That way I'll have a nice crisp edge. And for any of those lines that need to be softened, I'm going to use my number 30 natural hair brush and gently go along the edges. So while it's still damp, I want to create some trees. All I'm going to do is take my number 14 round sable synthetic blend, along with a little quinacridone gold and burnt sienna, and gently drop it into the drying surface. This is called a wet into wet technique. The advantage of doing this is that it can give the impression of lots of trees without having to really create every single little leaf, because that's when a painting can look overworked. And to help tie this painting together, I want to bring some of that background color into the foreground. So I'm gently going to skip my way across the surface, bringing it down to the bottom of the paper. And to help give the impression of grass, all I have to do is make a suggestion. I don't need to paint every single blade. So while I'm working on my foreground, my sky and ridgeline are continuing to dry. I'll continue to add color and soften lines until I'm satisfied. One thing I always like to do when I'm painting is to take a step back and reevaluate instead of being right on top of it all the time. Then I'm going to go back to my palette and take my number 20 round sable synthetic blend and load my brush full of color and apply it to my damp surface. I only want to apply my color along the ridge line, and I'll do a little negative painting around the trees that I'll have in my middle ground. The intention that I have is that the really wet color of my brush is going to compete and crawl into that almost dry background, which will give me that irregular edge of a blossom and the impression of trees on the ridgeline. As I mentioned in the beginning, the only way we can get that irregular edge is by the surface drying unevenly, and that one area is wetter than the other. Just like any other blossom, you're not actually able to see it happen sometimes. It just slowly happens on its own. So while I'm waiting, I'm going to move on and go back and layer my foreground. Then I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. Once dry, I'll be able to see if that accident, as we all usually call it, or magic happens. Now you can see what happened once it dried. It has a really nice irregular line to it, and it works really well for trees in the distance. Now using my number 8 round sable synthetic blend, I'm going to come back in using the same basic color combination on dry paper and define my house. You might be thinking that the colors are pretty monochromatic, but it does create a very nice feeling to the painting. So basically, what I'm intending to do is a little negative painting. I want to pull my house out, create a few trees, and to prevent it from looking overworked, I'll use my number 20 round sable synthetic blend and soften some of the edges. And for the foreground, I'll create a few little dots and lines to enhance the detail. Then for my house, which is my main focal point, I'm going to go ahead and add a few shadows. I'll be using the same colors that I've used throughout the entire painting, only with a little more water, making a lighter value. This helps to give the impression of depth. Notice how the house has a few little lost edges. This is really nice, and it helps prevent it from looking too stiff and stagnant. And to help clean up the lines on my roof, I'm going to deepen the value. Then I'll go ahead and evaluate my painting and see if I need to bring out any other details. This is the point where a lot of people can easily overwork a painting because it doesn't really look like you have everything that you need in here, when really you don't need to add much. For instance, all I'm going to do is take a number 3 synthetic and add the windows into my focal point. And I'm not really thinking about trying to paint windows. I'm trying to give the impression of windows. so all I need to do is add a few dots and a line here and there. If you try to paint everything that you see, it can look stiff and stagnant. Remember, you want an organic flow to the painting. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, happy painting. For more information on upcoming workshops, books, or DVDs, please visit my website, birgitoconnor.com.